Hi. Now, today we're going to just look at monoprinting and a few basic techniques around monoprinting, so we'll see how we go. Okay, so you can see my setup. I don't know if you can see, but this is a glass plate. It's a larger one than you've got, but it's a glass plate. And under the glass plate, I've put one sheet of the litho paper. Excuse me. The litho paper is the shiny stock that I've given you, so it's quite shiny. But on the back, it's matte. So the printing side is the shiny side because it just adheres better. So that's what we're going to use today. Okay, the first technique we're going to do is just a basic direct drawing technique. Now the thing with monoprinting is you're only getting a single print. Well, actually you're getting two. You're getting a positive print and a negative print. So a print and then a ghost, what we would call a ghost print, and I'll talk you through that shortly. I'm using block printing ink. But there are a number of different sorts of inks that you could use. Just happens to be that that's the ink that I'm using. I'll roll it up over that where the light's shining, so it won't be annoying. Less is more. So when you initially roll this up, you think you haven't got enough, and you just have to really get it moving. And often that first print is too dark. Okay, so I'm going to use, this is going to be the matrix. I probably shouldn't have put that over there, I just forgot. So you can actually roll directly onto here, but this is going to be the matrix. So this is what I'm going to physically ink up. When you're doing any sort of printing using a brayer, a roller, a brayer, so officially called a brayer, but we will accept roller, is that we want to get that tacky sound that you can hear, and you can see how here the sound is less tacky than there. And I'm trying as much as I can to get a pretty neat edge. And once I'm happy, I'm then just using the brayer to roll like that, so I'm not getting a hard edge. Your ones have got an edge more like that one. That goes that way up, not that way. This one doesn't have it. It's got a little wee spike just there, which helps it to sit up. I find it doesn't sit up very well. Okay, so I've got that nice and down. What I've done is I've got a sheet of litho paper, and I pre-prepared it with a little blind contour drawing of myself in my COVID mask. And I've drawn that on the matte side. So I've done a few drawings in advance in preparation for the process. So I'm going to put that down, shiny side down, and I don't want to disrupt or touch the surface. So I'm leaving that surface nice and clear. And then I'm going to draw onto it, but I'm using, in this case, a red pencil just because it was all I could find under duress, but it'll do the job. And I'm going to trace the surface. Now, the reason that I'm using a red pen's probably fairly obvious, and that's just basically that the red is allowing me to see what I've drawn. The other thing is I can make changes if I wanted to as I go along. So if there's bits that I'm not so mad on, I can change them a little bit. That arm's off the page. Now you could just draw your picture direct. The thing that I like about doing this is that it just gives me a little bit more control. It's a little bit less stressful, and I think we talked about the possibility of you doing some drawings excuse me, in advance last week, and it's a good excuse to do more drawing, which you really can't do enough of. Pencil's getting a bit blunt. Ooh, now I look like a duck. Oh well. Okay, so it's basically done. I can, if I wanted to, I could just darken a couple of areas just using my finger. The other thing, I've taken my rings off so that there's no chance of them denting the paper. So I'm just going to take this straight off now. And what we're going to get is an overly dark print, too dark, and I think the pencil's too thick, but that's okay. Takes a little while to get into the swing of doing it, I find. And I don't know if you can see there, but you can see some areas have had the ink has come off more and some areas it's come off less. And I'm using that guide that I have, that piece of paper underneath, I'm using that as a guide. Now, I can control whether I want to take that up now, it's very light, or I can use this funny little contraption, which is a brayer, and that's in the kit. And it's a very simple little device that allows you to put pressure onto the surface. And then we can take that second one off. So a little bit too wet that time round. I'll do the next one a little bit lighter, but you can see why this one's called a ghost, because its lines are white, whereas these lines are black. So I recommend you use a biro rather than the other. I'll use a pen for this next one. Okay, I don't worry about cleaning that off. I'll just go straight on there. You want to keep this as clean as you possibly can, so it's good to give everything a good wipe down before you commence, so that there's less chance of it spreading everywhere. Which I seem to have managed to do already. Okay, so second one, this time it's just a life drawing. And I've just traced that life drawing off. Hope for the best. Again, don't touch. Oh no, I've done it the wrong way. Oh. Don't do as I say, do as I... Don't do as I do, do as I say. Let's try that again. That was a bit close. Okay, sometimes it's good just to like press down in one point just to hold it. So this time I'm going to use a pen, which is going to give me a finer mark. You can't take too long here. This process has to happen fairly quickly or you will run out of time. What's going to happen if you're too slow, it's going to stick. The paper's going to stick and adhere to the glass, which we don't want to do. I find life drawings are really good to use, good repurposing of them. funny hand here. Okay, I think that's about it. All right, so we're going to take it off. That's better. And this time you can see it's much better, much more controlled. So now we'll take a second one. This one will be the ghost. I'm just going to line it up with that paper underneath, shiny side down. I should have shown you on that one, but I could have, when I was doing that one, while that was down, I could have just rubbed like into the background or just onto the figures, and I would have got an impression on the figures but not on the background, which can work really well, but I just forgot to show you. Okay, and this one time we can see the difference between the ghost and the straight print. Okay. You can see how quickly you end up with a lot of mess, a lot of stuff. So that's your first style. You can draw freeform straight on, or you can do it however suits you. That's fine. The second style is to use stencils of some sort. And this really lends itself to a more abstracted kind of, ideas around abstraction. Now, sorts of things you can use. You could use a circle, okay? You could use. I might use just some simple. These are just torn. These are old ones that I've just torn because they were pre-used, but they're going to do the job. So these are just simply torn pieces of paper, like that. Now I'm going to put on my fresh piece of paper. And now I've got a couple of options. I could just take the print as is, but equally I can come into that and I can put lines into it, for example. And I'm just choosing the simplest things. I could, as I was saying before, I could push more heavily into this section and maybe along there. And you can see how we've got shadows from where these are. I can then take those off. I might actually just forget putting that back on. And I might just use the brayer and take a simple print. Like that. And now when I take these off, I've also got quite interesting surfaces on these, which could then be rearranged in some way onto that. I can now take a second print. This whole process will also work just as well with acrylic paints. I'll just put a couple more lines on there. Yeah, these will work really well with acrylic paints as well. No problem at all. So you don't have to use, we're using block printing ink, but you don't have to use block printing ink. And you can see that one's a much lighter version, but kind of interesting all the same. Equally, we could I'll just use this side because it's wet enough. Equally, we could do the reverse. We could have a sheet of paper that blocks the image out. Okay, so the reverse, and then we print, and you know we can draw into. Whatever it might be. You can make certain areas darker, so forth. And then we're going to get an obvious stencil effect. I'm just going to use this one. This is an old one that I've used that's not very interesting. I'm going to put that over the top. So it's pretty experimental. There's no, you know, this is the way you have to do it. You can trial all sorts of ways of approach. Oh, it's not much better. You can only just see it. We're now going to have an imprint on the outside of that stencil, which I can then cut up and use for something else down the track. So a couple of examples of those, some better examples there that you can see where you can see how I've rubbed here. This is the ghost, this is the original, and you can see how that's got a lot more kind of surface layers being built up there, which is interesting. Now the last one that I want to show you, the last technique is where we're actually using a more painterly method. So this is quite painterly. And in this case, we're going to paint the matrix. So this is the matrix, and we're going to work this surface up. And it can be a picture or it could be purely abstracted, completely up to you. Just going to grab, so I've just got this, so I could scrape into it. So I could use paper towel. It can be really interesting to actually take areas away. You could use an old scrap of cloth, leftovers from your mask making maybe. So you can see how that's quite a textural surface that's building up. You could use just a cotton bud to build up, particular mark making techniques. So, do a bit more. It's quite sticky, this ink. It smells bad too. I should have opened up the window. You've all got different, there's a few different inks that I had to use up to get you all enough. And they vary. So some of them are very sticky, some of them are a lot looser. So you'll find, real differences. I could equally paint into this a little bit as well if I wanted. Would equally work. I could roll into an area and then work it back up if I didn't like where it was headed. And I could also use if I wanted a really neat edge, I could also use a stencil. Like so. That's just going to give a really clean edge. In addition to that, I can still also draw into the surface as well. Just make sure you've got a nice clean edge around that outside edge. Just rub that a bit more. Yeah, great. And then I can take an additional one and use this on the back of this one. Yeah. So you can see how some areas, because they're really dark inks, we're getting darker areas, but that's good. Okay, so that gives you 3 different techniques. The 4th one is a mix of all of the above, where you can do direct drawing on the back, you can use stencils, so you can do kind of a real mixed bag of techniques. One last thing though that I didn't mention to you is if you were to write say you wanted to make a statement on it, so if I was going to write COVID, if I write it that way on it, it's going to come out backwards. So if I want to write it, I need to write it like this. Okay, so I need to write it backwards so that it'll then come out forwards, because everything's reversed on the surface. If that makes sense. It's hard to get your head around at the start. It does take a while to really grasp it. When you're cleaning it up, it's good to keep working over one that you didn't like. I'm just using an old one here that's a bit of a fizzer. It's good just to work over the top of that to get as much ink as you can off before you go and clean up. I particularly like using sort of wipes of some sort. I find, work really, you can see how that works well, and then you can wash your glass plate after that. You need to have that glass plate must always remain really clear and clean. Remember what I said to you about not knocking that corner of the plate, because we don't want to bust it. That's the only way you're going to break it though. Otherwise it's robust as could be. So not very ecological, but in these times, yeah, desperate times call for desperate measures. I haven't got a sink up here, so that helps. So you can see how that's bringing it back to normal. Right, so remember you've got the direct drawing on the back. You pull two prints. You've got the use of stencils. You've got the painterly method, and you've got the potential for the mix of all of the above. Just show you a couple of examples while we're here, which hopefully I won't get everywhere, knock everywhere, hopefully. Shit, there I go already. Okay. Okay, so direct method, that's a ghost. Obviously that's the ghost print, because you can see that it's white on the black. So direct method, these are all direct method. Direct method, you can see how this is over the top of another print, so you've got these little white bits as well, which is nice. Direct method. Okay, in this case, the painterly type, but actually drawing a picture of something. Direct method, but very wet. And some of these different effects are because they're different papers, or they're different printing ink, so just the different types of ink. So the direct and the ghost. Direct and ghost. Direct and ghost. So you can see how they're very different from each other. Okay, so here's your painterly method. Painterly method. Painterly method. All of these are pretty rushed. Mixture of painterly method and the stenciling. You can, so once you've got dry bits, you can glue them down onto the surface, and that can produce really nice results. These ones are done like that. So these are glued down onto the surface. These are glued down onto the surface. So sometimes tearing up old ones can be really interesting to produce new results. In this case, I've cut out a series of triangles and just played around with placement. You can do that kind of thing. Yeah, that gives you the basic idea. So have fun with it. I would just stick to monochrome. You can see that I didn't use very much ink. You don't want to be chewing too far into your ink, because it's also going to needs to last for relief printing as well. But that gets you going.